The rust-colored dust of Tartarus settled on everything, a fine grit that worked its way into the cracks of your skin, the folds of your clothes, and the deepest corners of your soul. It was the planet's signature, a constant reminder that this was a place of decay, a graveyard for ships and hopes alike. My name is Kalen, though no one's used that name in years. Out here, in the scrapyards that ringed the fallen city of Erebus, I was just another scavenger, a ghost picking through the bones of a forgotten war. The official story was that the Outer Rim conflicts never reached this far, that Tartarus was just a dumping ground for decommissioned freighters and failed colony ships. But the old-timers, the ones with circuits for eyes and memories etched in radiation scars, they knew the truth. They spoke in hushed tones, over smuggled glasses of synthale, of a battle that tore a hole in the sky, a clash between forces so far beyond human comprehension that the United Terran hegemony scrubbed it from every official record. They said something fell here, something that wasn't ours, and that the hegemony's quarantine wasn't to keep scavengers out, but to keep something else in. I never put much stock in those stories. Fear was a currency on Tartarus, and the old-timers were rich with it. For me, the quarantine was just another fence to climb, another obstacle between me and a score, big enough to buy a ticket off this rock. I operated on the fringe, in the deep sectors where the hegemony patrols were lazy and the radiation spikes kept most of the competition at bay. That's where the best salvage was. The pre-collapse tech that could fetch a fortune on the black market. I had a knack for it, for sensing the faint energy signatures of dormant systems, for understanding the language of dying machines. My rig, the Sand Drifter, was a testament to that knack, a cobbled-together skimmer built from a dozen different wrecks, its engine humming a discordant tune of mismatched parts. It was my home, my workshop, and my only companion in the vast silent expanse of the scrapyards. It was during a particularly vicious ion storm that I found it. The storm had forced me to take shelter in the skeletal remains of a hegemony battlecruiser, the Iron Resolve, a colossal wreck that had been picked clean for centuries. As the storm raged outside, whipping metallic sand against the hull, my rig's deep-range scanner, a piece of tech I'd lifted from a military drone, began to scream. It wasn't a distress signal or a standard energy reading. It was a chaotic, rhythmic pulse, like a fractured heartbeat, coming from deep beneath the cruiser's wreckage. The signal was ghosting, appearing and disappearing, masked by the storm's interference. Any other scavenger would have written it off as a malfunction, a phantom signal born from the atmospheric chaos. But I knew my gear. The signal was real. And it was ancient. When the storm finally broke, I spent 3 cycles digging. The ground was a compacted mass of rusted plating, fused conduits, and the petrified bones of the Iron Resolve's crew. The work was brutal, my muscles screaming in protest, the air thick with the smell of ozone and decay. On the 4th cycle, my shovel struck something that wasn't rusted steel. It was smooth, dark, and cold to the touch, a material that seemed to drink the weak light of Tartarus's twin suns. It wasn't metal, not in any sense I knew. It felt organic, like polished obsidian, but it hummed with a contained energy that made the fillings in my teeth ache. I had uncovered the edge of a ship, but it was unlike anything I had ever seen. There were no seams, no rivets, no visible means of propulsion. Its design was fluid, predatory, like some deep-sea creature that had been pulled from the abyss and petrified. The ship, if that's what it was was impossibly old, yet its hull was unscratched, untouched by the centuries of corrosive sand and acidic rain that had eaten away at the hegemony warship above it. As I cleared more of the strange, black hull, I realized the rhythmic pulse my scanner had detected was coming from within, growing stronger, more insistent. The closer I got, I spent the next week in a state of obsessive focus, excavating the buried vessel. The sand drifter's cutting torches barely scratched its surface. So I resorted to using controlled plasma charges, carefully blasting away the surrounding debris. The ship was larger than I had initially thought, a sleek, arrowhead-shaped craft that had clearly been downed in a fight. One of its swept-back wings was sheared off, the break clean, as if cut by a blade of immense energy. This was no freighter. This was a warship. As I worked, a strange feeling began to creep over me, a sense of being watched, not by eyes, but by a presence. The air around the ship felt heavy, charged, and at night, I was plagued by dreams of starless voids and silent, geometric cities. I started talking to it, not out of loneliness, but because it felt like the ship was listening. I told it about Tartarus, about the rust and the rain and the feeling of being trapped. I told it about the hegemony and their lies, about the life I was trying to escape. I don't know why I did it. Maybe the isolation was finally getting to me, or maybe the ship was already reaching out, planting seeds in my subconscious. On the 8th day, I found the entry point. It wasn't a door or a hatch. It was a section of the hull that had become translucent, glowing with a faint, internal light. It had appeared in a spot I had cleared just hours before. It was an invitation. My survival instincts, honed by years of navigating the treacherous scrapyards, screamed at me to run, to get in my rig and disappear into the wastes, to forget I had ever seen this thing. But my curiosity, that desperate, gnawing need to find something more than just another piece of salvage, was stronger. I placed my hand on the glowing section of the hull. The surface was warm, and it vibrated in time with the rhythmic pulse I'd been tracking. The moment my skin made contact, a jolt, not of electricity, but of pure information, shot up my arm and exploded in my mind. It was a torrent of alien thoughts, of feelings and memories that weren't my own. I saw flashes of a battle in the heart of a nebula, ships like silver needles clashing with monolithic, crystalline dreadnoughts. I felt a surge of cold, calculated fury, the thrill of the hunt, and then a wave of searing agony as the ship was struck, its connection to a collective consciousness severed. I felt it fall, tumbling through the void, wounded and alone. Then, darkness, silence, and centuries of waiting. I collapsed, my nose bleeding, my mind reeling from the psychic backlash. The experience was violating, terrifying, but also exhilarating. The ship wasn't just a machine, it was a living entity, or at least the remnant of one. Its consciousness was shattered, fragmented, but a part of it had survived, sleeping, dreaming its broken dreams beneath the sands of Tartarus. And it had just shared a piece of that dream with me. When I came to, the glowing panel was an open portal, a shimmering, liquid-like aperture that led into the ship's interior. I hesitated for only a moment. This was it, the score of a lifetime, the thing that could change everything. Or it was a tomb, a trap laid by something ancient and unknowable. Either way, it was a way out of the life I was living. I grabbed a portable floodlight and my multi-tool and stepped through the portal. The inside of the ship was as alien as the outside. There were no corridors, no distinct rooms, just a single, cavernous space that seemed to reconfigure itself as I moved through it. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they were all made of the same dark, semi-organic material, and they shifted and flowed like liquid mercury, forming walkways and platforms in front of me, sealing the path behind me. The air was cool and smelled of sterile ozone and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like spilled blood. The rhythmic pulsing was louder in here, a constant, low-frequency thrum that I could feel in my bones. It was the ship's heart, and it was beating faster now that I was inside. At the center of the vast chamber was the source of the light, a raised dais upon which floated a latticework of crystalline structures. They pulsed with a soft, blue light, and as I approached, I could hear whispers, not in my ears, but directly in my mind. They were fragments of thoughts, echoes of the ship's shattered consciousness, tactical reports in a language of pure mathematics, a pilot's lament for its lost comrades, a cold, unending hatred for the crystalline enemy that had brought it down. The ship was a repository of pain and memory. A soldier left for dead on a forgotten battlefield. It was broken, just like me. I spent what felt like days inside, exploring the shifting interior, drawn deeper into the mystery of the vessel. The ship, which I began to call Nomad, for its solitary existence, seemed to be studying me as much as I was studying it. It would project images onto the walls, star charts of unknown galaxies, anatomical diagrams of species I had never seen, and over again, the image of its enemy, the crystalline ships, vast and terrifying in their perfect geometry. It was trying to communicate and to tell me its story. It showed me what it was: a scout, a hunter, a weapon designed for a single purpose: to track and destroy its crystalline foes, the geodes. As my mind translated the concept, the Nomad was part of a sentient fleet, a collective consciousness that shared thoughts, strategies, and experiences across the vastness of space. When it was struck down, that connection was severed, leaving it isolated, a shard of a greater whole. It was this severing, this profound loneliness, that seemed to cause it the most pain. I found what I assumed was the cockpit, or its equivalent. There was no chair, no manual controls, just a recessed alcove that seemed designed to cradle a body. As I stepped into it, tendrils of the same dark material as the walls snaked out from the floor and wrapped around my limbs and torso, holding me gently but firmly. A crystalline shard descended from the ceiling, its point hovering inches from my forehead. The whispers in my head coalesced into a single, coherent thought, a question that was not a question, a plea that was also a demand. Interface. It wanted to connect, to merge its broken consciousness with mine. It was a desperate gamble. For the ship, it was a chance to repair itself, to find a new pilot, a new purpose. For me, it was a path to power I couldn't imagine, a way to not just leave Tartarus, but to command a force that could make the hegemony look like children playing with toys. But the risk was immense. I could be consumed, my personality erased, my body turned into a mere puppet for an alien machine. I thought of my life on Tartarus, a life of scavenging for scraps, of breathing rust and dust, of being another piece of forgotten junk in a universe that didn't care. I thought of the endless, empty horizon, and the feeling of being trapped. The Nomad was offering me a way out, a chance to be something more. It was the ultimate salvage, and I was its final component. The tendrils tightened, and the crystal shard began to glow. I closed my eyes and gave the ship my answer, not in words, but in a surge of my own desperate will to live, to escape, to be free. Yes, the pain was unimaginable. It was a fire in my veins, a storm in my mind. The ship poured its entire being into me, centuries of memory, the trauma of its last battle, the cold, alien logic of its creators. My own memories felt insignificant, washed away in the flood. I screamed, but the sound was lost in the psychic cacophony. I felt my body changing, my neural pathways being rewritten, my DNA being subtly altered. The ship was repairing itself, using me as a template, and in turn, it was rebuilding me, making me compatible, turning me into something that was no longer entirely human. The process was an agony of transformation, a crucible in which Kalen, the scavenger, was being burned away, and something new was being forged in the fire. I felt the Nomad systems coming online, one by one, powered by the fusion of our consciousnesses. The dim interior of the ship blazed with light. The thrumming of its heart became a steady, powerful roar. I could feel the ship's hull, its engines, its dormant weapon systems, as if they were my own limbs. I could see through its external sensors, my vision expanding to encompass the entire spectrum of light. I saw the scrapyards of Tartarus, not as a graveyard of metal, but as a tapestry of energy signatures, a buffet of resources. The ship was hungry, and now, so was I. When the interface was complete, the pain subsided, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose unlike anything I had ever known. I was still me, but I was also more. I was Kalen, and I was the Nomad. We were two broken pieces that, together, had become whole. The tendrils retracted, and I stepped out of the alcove, my body aching but alive with a new, alien energy. The whispers in my head were gone, replaced by a single, silent voice that was both mine and the ship's. We are one. The first thing we did was feed. I guided the Nomad through the scrapyards, using its own systems to levitate above the ground, silent and unseen. We were a ghost, a predator in our own hunting ground. We didn't just salvage parts, we absorbed them. The Nomad extended tendrils of its dark hull, touching the wrecks of hegemony warships, decommissioned mining haulers, and fallen satellites. It broke them down at a molecular level, drawing their metals, their power cores, their computer systems into itself. It was repairing the damage it had sustained in its ancient battle, integrating the crude but functional human technology into its own alien matrix. The sheared-off wing began to regrow, not as it was, but as something new, a hybrid of fluid, organic design, and the hard-angled, practical aesthetic of hegemony engineering. Our power levels climbed, our systems stabilized. We were becoming stronger, more complete. During this process of rebuilding, I learned more about the Nomad's enemies, the geodes. They weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They were purifiers. They saw organic life as a chaotic, imperfect variable in the universe's grand equation. Their goal was to crystallize everything, to turn the messy, unpredictable nature of biology into a state of perfect, ordered, and eternal stasis. They were the antithesis of life, a force of absolute order that sought to impose its will on all creation. The Nomads' creators, a species I could only comprehend as the Weavers, had built the sentient fleet to be the universe's immune system, a counteragent to the Geodes' sterile perfectionism. They were locked in a war that had lasted for eons, a conflict fought in the shadows, far beyond the perception of younger races like humanity. The battle over Tartarus had been just one skirmish in that endless war. The Nomad had been lured into a trap, ambushed by a Geode fleet, and struck down. Its siblings in the collective had presumed it destroyed, its consciousness extinguished. It was a forgotten soldier, a lost cause, but it hadn't died. It had slept, and now, thanks to a desperate scavenger, it was awake again, and it was angry. As we finished our repairs, a new awareness began to dawn in our shared consciousness. We were no longer just a scout. The integration of human technology, my human ingenuity and unpredictability, had changed the ship's fundamental nature. We were something new, something the Geodes wouldn't anticipate. We were a hybrid, a rogue element in their perfectly ordered universe. Our purpose was no longer just to hunt, it was to evolve, to adapt, to become a weapon that even our creators hadn't envisioned. Our first test came sooner than expected. A hegemony patrol, a heavy cruiser called the Vigilance, had detected our energy signatures. The quarantine around Tartarus, it turned out, was more than just a formality. The hegemony knew something was buried here, and they were terrified of it waking up. The Vigilance wasn't on a routine patrol. It was a watchdog. It hailed us, its transmission a burst of arrogant, official static. Unidentified vessel, you have violated Hegemony Quarantine Sector 7. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Failure to comply will be met with lethal force. I felt the Nomad's cold fury rise within me, a desire to lash out, to show this primitive, loud-mouthed creature what true power was. But my own instincts, the cunning of a scavenger who had survived by being smarter, not stronger, tempered the alien rage. We didn't respond. We didn't power down. We simply cloaked. The Nomad's hull shimmered and then vanished from sight. Our energy signature masked by a bubble of warped space-time. The Vigilance was left staring at an empty patch of desert. They fired a warning shot, a lance of plasma that scorched the sand where we had been moments before. They were confused, their sensors unable to reconcile the massive energy readings with the empty space before them. They began a sweep, their searchlights cutting through the dust-filled twilight. We watched them from the shadows, a silent, invisible predator. They were clumsy, predictable. Their technology was generations behind ours. They were an annoyance, but they were also an opportunity. They are a threat. The Nomad's voice echoed in my mind. Their presence will alert others. It complicates our primary objective. They're also a source of spare parts, I countered, a grin spreading across my face. And I think it's time we tested our new teeth. The decision was made. We would not run. We would not hide. Our time on Tartarus was over. The universe was waiting. And we had a war to rejoin. But first, we would remind the hegemony why some things are best left buried. The Vigilance would be our first lesson, our first statement. We were the junk that the universe had thrown away, the forgotten soldier and the desperate scavenger. But together, we were something else entirely. We were the ghost of Tartarus, and our hunt was about to begin. The hegemony cruiser, the Vigilance, was a blind, deaf beast shouting into the void. We watched it from the cloak of warped space-time, our shared consciousness processing its every move. I could feel the ship's crew through the Nomad's passive sensors, their heart rates elevated. Their comms chatter a frantic symphony of confusion and growing fear. They were scanning for us, firing sensor pings that washed over our hull like harmless rain, completely oblivious to the predator coiled in the darkness just outside their viewports. Their captain, a man whose service record and psychological profile we had already passively downloaded from his ship's unsecure personnel files, was posturing on the bridge, his voice a brittle facsimile of authority. He was projecting confidence he didn't feel, a fact that amused the human part of me. The Nomad, however, felt no amusement, only a cold, analytical contempt for their inefficiency. Their weapon systems are charging. Its thought, clean and sharp, cut through my own. Their protocols dictate a saturation bombardment of our last known coordinates, a primitive and wasteful tactic. It's what scared people do. I sent back, a phantom grin touching my thoughts. They make a lot of noise and hope the problem goes away. We decided against a direct assault. Brute force was their language, not ours. We would speak in whispers, in impossibilities. We would dismantle them piece by piece, not just their ship, but their sanity. Our first move was silent, a micro-tendril of the Nomad's hull, no thicker than a wire, extended from our cloaked form. It stretched across the intervening space, phasing through the Vigilance's armored plating as if it were smoke. Inside their engineering bay, the tendril touched the primary coolant regulator for their plasma cannon. We didn't destroy it, we simply borrowed it. The component dematerialized from its housing and reappeared inside our own storage matrix, a small trophy of our first incursion on the bridge of the Vigilance. 1,000 alarms shrieked at once. Their main cannon was offline, its core temperature skyrocketing. They had no explanation, no sign of attack. The part was just gone. Panic began to curdle the captain's forced composure. He ordered a diagnostic, then another, his voice growing tighter. While they scrambled to understand the impossible, we moved to the life support systems. We didn't shut them down. That would have been too merciful. Instead, we altered the atmospheric mixture, increasing the nitrogen levels by a mere 5% and subtly lowering the oxygen. It wasn't enough to be fatal, but it was enough to make them feel it. Their breathing would become labored, their thoughts sluggish, their paranoia amplified by hypoxia. We were a ghost in their machine, a virus in their blood. They began firing wildly into the empty desert, their plasma bolts carving molten furrows in the sand. A desperate attempt to fight a phantom they couldn't see or comprehend. We let them exhaust their secondary weapon capacitors, watching their power levels dip, their frustration mounting. Then we showed ourselves. For a fraction of a second, we dropped the cloak directly in front of their bridge. We let them see us, the impossible black ship with its fluid lines and the single, glowing blue heart of its core. We let them see the hegemony plating we had integrated into our own hull, a twisted mockery of their own design. And then we were gone again. The effect was exactly what I had intended. The brief visual confirmation shattered their denial. The monster was real. The comms chatter dissolved into outright terror. Men were shouting. Others were praying. The captain was screaming for a target lock that his systems couldn't provide. They were broken, not by our weapons, but by their own fear. The final act was one of consumption. We surrounded the Vigilance, our form still cloaked, and projected a localized stasis field. The hegemony cruiser froze, its engines silenced, its frantic energy bolts frozen mid-flight. Then, the Nomad's hull began to flow, to expand, engulfing the paralyzed ship. It was not a collision, it was an absorption. I felt the metal of the Vigilance screaming under the molecular deconstruction, its systems surrendering their secrets, its power core being drained and assimilated into our own. The process was a feast, a violent and exhilarating symphony of deconstruction. We took everything their fuel, their munitions, their advanced sensor logs, and most importantly, their data core. Centuries of human history, galactic charts, hegemony fleet deployments, and classified intelligence reports flooded our shared consciousness. It was a chaotic, beautiful, infuriating mess of a species' progress, and we drank it all in. We learned that the hegemony was a sprawling, bureaucratic empire, powerful but complacent, blind to the true dangers lurking in the void. We learned of dozens of unexplained phenomena on fringe worlds, colonies that went silent, ships that vanished, strange crystalline growths found on asteroids all dismissed as stellar radiation or pirate activity. The geodes were already here, moving in the shadows, their influence a subtle poison that the hegemony was too arrogant to see. We learned of black sites and secret research projects, of the hegemony's own attempts to reverse engineer alien technology, pathetic efforts that only highlighted their ignorance. We saw the universe through their eyes and found it wanting. The crew of the Vigilance was the last to be absorbed. The Nomad was indifferent to them, seeing them only as biological matter to be broken down and repurposed. But the human part of me, the scavenger who knew what it was like to be helpless, paused. I sifted through their final moments, their terror, their memories of families on distant worlds, their futile bravery. There was no pleasure in their end, only a grim necessity. They were watchdogs for a system that had left me to rot. They stood between us and our purpose. We granted them a quick, painless dissolution. Once the Vigilance was gone, not even a scrap of debris remaining, Tartarus fell silent again. But it was a different silence now. It was the silence of a tomb that had been opened, its occupant unleashed. We were no longer a secret. The Vigilance would be reported missing, and eventually, the hegemony would send a larger, more formidable force. We could not stay. Using the newly acquired star charts, we plotted a course, not into the heart of hegemony space. We were not yet ready for that confrontation, but to its frayed edges, to the lawless sectors where the forgotten and the hunted gathered. We needed a place to lie low, to continue our evolution, to gather information not found in official hegemony databases. We chose a destination, a hollowed-out asteroid known as the Vein, a notorious shadow port that served as a hub for smugglers, mercenaries, and information brokers. It was a place where a ship like ours, with its unique and valuable technology, could either find a fortune or a quick and violent end. It was perfect. Our departure from Tartarus was not an escape. It was an ascension. The Nomad lifted from the rust-colored dust, its hybrid form a thing of terrible beauty. We tore a hole in the atmosphere and punched into the cold, silent void of space. The sensation of FTL travel, of bending space-time to our will, was breathtaking. It wasn't the jarring, stomach-churning lurch of human jump drives. It was a smooth, silent glide through the folds of reality. I saw the universe not as a collection of stars, but as a living tapestry of energy and gravity, and we were the needle threading our way through it. It was during our second jump, while traversing a desolate, uncharted nebula, that we found it. A distress signal, faint and distorted, pulsed in the darkness. It was an old civilian frequency, a freighter by the sound of it. The Nomad's logic dictated we ignore it. It was irrelevant to our mission. But my own curiosity, a trait the Nomad was still learning to process, urged us to investigate. We dropped out of FTL and drifted toward the source of the signal. The ship was a Tartarus-class hauler, a common sight on the trade lanes. But this one was horribly wrong. It was adrift, its lights dead, its hull glittering. As we drew closer, we saw that the entire vessel had been transformed. Its metal plating was now a semi-translucent, crystalline structure, like a ship carved from smoky quartz. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, a sickeningly beautiful display of unnatural conversion. We scanned for life signs. There were none. But there were biosignatures, hundreds of them, perfectly preserved. We projected a remote drone, a swarm of nanoprobes that phased through the crystallized hull. The images they sent back to our consciousness were the stuff of nightmares. The crew was still at their posts, frozen in their final moments. A pilot sat at his console, his hands outstretched, his face a mask of terror, his body now a flawless sculpture of amethyst. In the mess hall, crew members were gathered around a table, their game of cards interrupted for eternity, their forms fused into a single, grotesque tableau of agate and jade. A mother in the crew quarters was holding her child, their embrace solidified into a heartbreaking monument of rose quartz. They hadn't been killed. They had been perfected, changed. Their chaotic, organic messiness had been erased and replaced with the cold, sterile beauty of crystal. This was the work of the geodes. It was a calling card, a work of art, and a declaration of war. A cold, silent rage, deeper and more profound than anything I had ever felt, filled our shared mind. This was not just a threat. It was an abomination. The Nomad felt it too. The ancient, burning hatred for its enemy rekindled by this horrific scene. The geodes hadn't just destroyed this crew. They had stolen their very nature, turning their life into a sterile mockery. We found the ship's black box. Its data core also crystallized, but the information within perfectly preserved. The freighter, the Stardust Drifter, had been transporting refugees from a fringe colony that had suffered a geological plague. They hadn't known the truth until it was too late. Their final log was a single, terrified scream, cut short as the crystallization wave washed over their ship. We had our proof. We had our mission. It was no longer just about survival or revenge. We were the only ones who truly understood the nature of this silent, creeping apocalypse. We were the only ones who could fight it. We left the crystal ship behind, a silent tomb in the dark, and resumed our course for the vein. But our purpose was now razor sharp. We were not just hiding or regrouping. We were gathering strength. We were forging a weapon. The vein was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a recruiting ground, a marketplace for the tools and allies we would need. The game had changed. The scavenger from Tartarus was dead, and the lonely alien soldier was no more. In our place stood a reckoning, a hybrid of flesh and machine, of rage and logic. The geodes saw life as a flaw to be corrected. We would show them that the universe's greatest flaws were the ones that fought back. Our arrival at the Vane was met with a cacophony of unregulated comms traffic, overlapping docking requests, and illicit advertisements. The asteroid was a jagged, ugly thing, pockmarked with landing bays, docking clamps, and makeshift structures that clung to its surface like barnacles. Its interior was a labyrinth of tunnels and caverns, glowing with the lurid neon of bars and black markets. It was a chaotic, dirty, and dangerous place. It was the perfect place to begin a war. Docking at the Vane was a delicate dance of deception. We couldn't simply announce our arrival. A ship like the Nomad would have been swarmed by every pirate, corporation, and hegemony spy in the sector within minutes. We needed a disguise, a legend. Before we entered the system, we used the technology we had absorbed from the Vigilance and our own advanced systems to construct a shell. We projected a hard light hologram around the Nomad, layering it with fabricated heat signatures and a bogus transponder signal. We became the Orbiter, a heavily modified rust bucket asteroid miner that had seen better decades. The disguise was flawless, a piece of technological artifice so perfect that it fooled not only the Vane's traffic control, but our own visual sensors. To any outside observer, we were just another desperate crew of rockhoppers looking to offload questionable cargo and drown their sorrows in cheap synthale. The Nomad found the charade illogical, but understood its strategic necessity. For me, it was like putting on an old, familiar coat. I was a scavenger again, just with a much, much bigger multi-tool. We secured a docking berth in the deepest, darkest corner of the Vane, a section known as the Sump, where the station's refuse was recycled and the clientele was best left unobserved. The air was a thick soup of recycled oxygen, coolant fumes, and the unidentifiable stench of 1,000 different species crammed into too small a space. It was disgusting. It felt like home. My first task was to make contact with an information broker. In a place like the Vane, information was more valuable than platinum or weapons-grade uranium. I needed to know everything: the current political climate in the Outer Rim, the movements of the hegemony fleet, any whispers of strange, crystalline phenomena, and, most importantly, who on this rock had the skills, the tech, or the desperation to be useful to our cause. I left the Nomad cloaked and dormant in the docking bay, a silent, sleeping predator hidden within the ugly shell of the Orbiter. The connection between us remained, a psychic tether that allowed us to communicate silently. But for this part of the mission, I had to walk the tunnels of the Vane alone. I needed to be Kalen again, or at least a believable version of him. I found a bar called the Gilded Cage, a dimly lit cavern where fortunes were won and lost, and secrets were traded over games of chance. The patrons were a motley collection of augmented humans, hulking alien mercenaries, and twitchy cyber jockeys whose bodies were more machine than flesh. I found my target at a circular table in the back, a being known only as Silas. Silas was an enigma. No one knew his species, as his entire body was a swirling mass of nanites contained within a loosely humanoid-shaped environmental suit. He saw everything, heard everything, and sold what he knew to the highest bidder. I bought a round of drinks, a foul-smelling liquid that burned on the way down, and approached his table. They say, if you want to find a ghost, you talk to Silas. I said, my voice rough from disuse. The cloud of nanites in his suit swirled, forcing a semblance of a face that regarded me with cold curiosity. Ghosts are expensive. A synthesized voice emanated from the suit, 1,000 tiny voices speaking as one. And you look like you've been chasing them through a scrapyard. I'm not chasing ghosts, I replied, placing a data chip on the table. I'm hunting gods. The data chip contained a small, carefully curated piece of our story sensor logs from the Crystal Freighter, the Stardust Drifter, scrubbed of any data that could identify the nomad. It was a lure, a taste of a secret so profound it would be irresistible to a creature like Silas. The nanites in his suit churned with agitation as he accessed the data. The synthesized voice was a fraction of a second slower when it responded, a telltale sign of shock. This is not a known weapon signature, not hegemony, not pirate. I need to know if anyone else has seen anything like it, I said, leaning in. Any colonies gone dark, any ships vanished, any miners pulling up rocks that glitter in the dark. I also need a list. The best and most discreet shipbreaker in the vein. A weaponsmith who works with exotic energy signatures. And a pilot who can fly a ghost through hell. Silas was silent for a long time, the nanite cloud in his suit swirling like a captured storm. He was calculating, weighing the risk against the reward. The information on that chip was priceless, but it was also dangerous. Whatever had done that to the Stardust Drifter was power that could unmake empires. The list will cost you more than you have, he finally said. My employer is generous, I replied, letting a hint of the nomad's cold confidence bleed into my voice. I pushed another chip across the table, this one containing a small fortune in untraceable cryptocurrency, siphoned from the Vigilance's slush funds. Silas took the chip. The shipbreaker is a Giral, goes by the name of Wrench, works out of the old smelting core in Sector Gamma. She can strip a battlecruiser down to its frame in a standard cycle, and her workshops are shielded from every sensor in the system. The weaponsmith is an exiled Cathar named Xylo. He sees energy patterns as art and can build a cannon out of a power cell and a bad attitude. Find him in the lower coils, but do not touch his tools. The pilot, that is more difficult. The nanite face paused. There is one, a human, former Hegemony Special Forces. Name's Eva Rostova. Best stick jock this side of the core worlds. She flew Black Ops. Ghost missions. They say she once piloted a dropship through the collapsing core of a star. But she's broken. Washed out. Disgraced. Spends her days flying high-G races in the asteroid fields, trying to kill herself, one near miss at a time. Where can I find her? I asked. Silas gestured with a swirling appendage towards the far end of the bar, where a high-stakes gambling machine was surrounded by a jeering crowd. She's losing. Eva Rostova was a storm contained in a human frame. She had a lean, wiry build, and her face was a roadmap of past fights and future troubles. Her eyes, a startling ice blue, held a weariness that went bone deep. But beneath it, there was a flicker of something wild and untamed. She was betting her souped-up racing skiff against a sleazy Rhodian smuggler in a game of neural reflex simulation. And as Silas had said, she was losing badly. I waited until she had lost everything, until the Rhodian had swaggered off with the keys to her ship and her last few credits. She didn't rage. She didn't plead. She just stood there, staring at the game screen with a terrifying emptiness, as if she had been hoping for that outcome. Tough break, I said, stepping up beside her. She didn't look at me, her gaze still fixed on the screen. You got something to say, Junker? Or are you just admiring the view? I'm looking for a pilot, I said. Someone who isn't afraid of ghosts. That got her attention. She turned her head slowly, her icy eyes appraising me, dissecting me with a practiced, military precision. I'm not for hire. This isn't a job, I said. It's a war, and the side I'm on pays in second chances. I told her a version of the truth. I told her about a silent, creeping enemy that was turning ships and colonies to crystal. I told her I had a ship, an unusual one, and I was putting together a crew to fight back. I didn't tell her the ship was alive, or that I was bonded to it. That was a truth she wasn't ready for. She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You're insane. You and what army are going to fight a crystal plague? You're just another doomsday cultist with a stolen ship. I'm the one who can get your racing skiff back, I said. The statement hung in the air between us. It wasn't a threat, but it was a demonstration of capability. Her eyes narrowed. How? Leave that to me, I said. Meet me at Docking Bay, 94 in the sump in 1 hour. If your ship is there, you'll hear me out. If it's not, you never have to see me again. I walked away before she could answer. The Nomad, still tethered to my consciousness, had been listening. Her psychological profile indicates a high probability of self-destructive tendencies, but also an unparalleled aptitude for high-stress maneuvering. She is a valuable, if volatile, asset. Everyone worth a damn is a little broken. I thought back. Fixing her ship is the easy part. Fixing her is going to be the challenge. We located the Rhodian smuggler in a chop shop in the lower levels, already in the process of stripping Eva's skiff for parts. The Nomad handled it. A localized system failure caused the shop's magnetic lifts to drop a half-ton engine block onto the Rhodian's own vessel, crushing it. At the same time, the security codes on Eva's skiff were remotely scrambled and rewritten. As the Rhodian and his goons were distracted by the wreckage of their own ship, we used a low-power tractor beam, masked as a gravitational anomaly, to levitate the skiff out of the shop and guide it back to Docking Bay 94. It was a simple, elegant solution that left no witnesses and no evidence of our involvement. When Ava arrived at the bay an hour later, her skiff was waiting for her, untouched, its engines humming softly. She stared at it, then at me, her tough exterior cracking just enough to show a flicker of disbelief and something else. Hope. Okay, Junker, she said, her voice quiet. You have my attention. Start talking. The next pieces of the puzzle were Wrench and Xylo. Finding Wrench, the Giral shipbreaker, was like descending into a mechanical hell. The old smelting core was a cavern of immense scale, filled with the skeletons of starships, lit by the sporadic flashes of plasma cutters and the molten glow of arc welders. Wrench herself was a mountain of muscle and cybernetics, her 4 powerful arms capable of tearing through a ship's hull with terrifying ease. She communicated in grunts and gestures, her vocal cords having been replaced by a crackling vox emitter. I showed her the schematics of the Nomad. Not its true, fluid form, but a version based on its new, hybrid structure. I told her I needed to integrate new systems, to braid hegemony tech with something older, something alien. She looked at the designs, her optical sensors glowing red as she processed the impossible geometry. She didn't ask where I got the ship. She didn't care. She just saw the challenge, the ultimate puzzle box for a master shipbreaker. She pointed a massive, hydraulic claw at a pile of rare alloys in the corner of her workshop, then back at me. Her price was access to our technology, the chance to work with materials she had only dreamed of. We agreed. Xylo, the Cathar weaponsmith, was a different challenge altogether. His workshop in the lower coils was more like a temple, a place of quiet, focused creation. The Cathar were a species of insectoids who perceived the universe as a symphony of energy. Xylo was an artist, and his medium was destruction. He was tall and slender, his chitinous exoskeleton a deep, iridescent blue, his multifaceted eyes seeing far more than a human could. I didn't show him schematics. I showed him the energy signature of the Geodes' crystallization weapon, the data we had pulled from the Stardust Drifter. Xylo recoiled, his antennae vibrating with a mixture of horror and fascination. "This is wrong," he hissed, his voice a series of melodic clicks and whistles. "This is silence, a frequency that unmakes music, a weapon that kills life by making it perfect." He understood on a fundamental, energetic level. He understood the horror of the Geodes' philosophy. "I want to build a weapon that can sing a different song," I told him. "Something that can introduce a little chaos into their perfect silence." Xylo's multifaceted eyes focused on me, seeing the strange, hybrid energy that now defined my existence. He saw the human and the alien, the scavenger and the soldier, two dissonant notes that had somehow found a harmony. "The song you wish to sing will be a scream," he clicked. "But it will be a song nonetheless. I will help you compose it." With the core of our crew assembled, the real work began. Wrench, with the Nomad's silent, microscopic guidance, began the delicate and dangerous process of physically integrating new systems into the ship's hull. We cannibalized the best parts of hegemony military tech we'd acquired from the Vigilance, reinforcing the Nomad's superstructure, adding layers of ablative armor, and building a physical cockpit for Eva, a concession to her human limitations that the Nomad found inefficient, but I knew was necessary. Xylo worked on our weapons. He didn't just build guns. He wove energy. Using the Nomad's power core as his instrument, he created a resonance cannon, a weapon designed not to blast the Geodes' crystal ships, but to vibrate them at their unique resonant frequency. If he could find the right note, he could theoretically shatter their crystalline structures from the inside out. It was a weapon of pure, weaponized chaos. Eva, meanwhile, spent her time in the simulator, a virtual cockpit projected directly into her mind by the Nomad. At first, she was resistant, wary of the alien technology, but the lure of flying a ship that could bend space-time, that could move with the fluidity of thought, was too much for a pilot like her to resist. She pushed the ship, and herself, to the breaking point, her instincts and experience merging with the Nomad's cold, calculated logic. They were a strange pair. The hot-headed, reckless pilot and the ancient, patient machine. But in the simulated chaos of battle, they learned to dance. While they worked, I became the nexus, the bridge between them all. I coordinated with Wrench, translated Xylo's energy-based concepts into practical terms, and acted as a buffer between Eva's volatile personality and the Nomad's alien consciousness. The ship was our body, but we were becoming its soul, a discordant but powerful choir of broken, desperate individuals. We were a crew of junk, a collection of discarded parts, but we were being forged into something new, something strong. The silence from the geodes was deafening. We scanned every frequency, hacked every deep space relay, but there was nothing. It was as if they had vanished. But we knew better. They were not gone. They were watching, observing, calculating. The destruction of the Stardust Drifter was a test, an experiment. The silence was the time they were taking to analyze the results. The storm was coming. We had found a sanctuary in the heart of chaos, and within it, we were sharpening our teeth. The vein had given us the tools and the talent we needed. Now, all we had to do was wait for the war to find us. The waiting was a strange kind of purgatory. For weeks, the sump became our universe, the nomad, our sanctuary, and our forge. Wrench worked with a relentless, silent fury. Her massive form a constant blur of motion amidst the sparks of plasma welders and the hum of grav lifts. She was more than just a mechanic. She was a sculptor, and her medium was the nomad's living hull. Under her hands and claws, guided by the ship's internal nanites, the nomad's form continued to evolve. The last of its battle scars vanished, replaced by a seamless fusion of its original organic curves and the hard-edged, functional plating of hegemony military hardware. We were no longer just a ghost. We were an armored phantom, a creature of both shadow and steel. Eva lived in the simulator. The nomad fed her increasingly complex scenarios, pitting her against entire fleets of geode fighters and hegemony battle groups. I would watch the data streams, a visual representation of their shared consciousness in flight. It was a terrifyingly beautiful ballet. Ava's intuitive, reckless brilliance was the fire, the nomad's cold. Processing power was the ice. Together, they were creating a new form of combat, a fighting style that was both an art and a science. She began to change, the hard, brittle shell of her despair cracking, the thrill of flying a machine that could anticipate her every thought, that could execute maneuvers that defied physics, was reigniting the spark that the hegemony had tried so hard to extinguish. She was starting to smile again. Not the bitter, self-destructive smirk she'd worn in the bar, but a genuine, adrenaline-fueled grin of a pilot who had finally found a machine worthy of her skill. Xylo's workshop became the heart of our new purpose. He and the nomad were locked in a constant, silent dialogue of energy and frequency. Xylo would spend days in a meditative trance, his multifaceted eyes staring into the swirling heart of a containment field, his antennae twitching as he listened to the universe's background radiation. He was searching for the geode's fundamental frequency, the key to their crystalline structure. He called it the sound of silence, the harmonic that bound their molecular structure together. The nomad, in turn, would feed him data, running simulations, creating theoretical energy models, acting as his infinitely patient and powerful research assistant. My role in all of this was to be the conductor of our chaotic orchestra. I was the voice of the nomad, translating its silent, logical directives into human terms. I was the quartermaster, using our dwindling funds and Silas's discreet network to acquire the rare materials and components our crew needed. I was the strategist, poring over the stolen hegemony star charts, cross-referencing them with the nomad's ancient, alien knowledge, trying to predict where the geodes would strike next. The pressure was immense. The bond between myself and the nomad was deepening, the lines between my thoughts and its own becoming increasingly blurred. I would wake from dreams of crystalline cities and silent, starless voids, my heart pounding with an ancient, inherited fear The ship's trauma was becoming my own. But so was its strength. I could feel the ship's systems as an extension of my own body. Its energy reserves a phantom limb. It censors a sixth sense that warned me of dangers before they arose. I was becoming less human, but also more than I had ever been. Our first break came from Silas. He contacted me through a secure, one-time channel, his synthesized voice tight with urgency. "The whispers have started," he said. "A mining colony in the Charon Nebula, the Crimson Deep, went dark 3 cycles ago. Hegemony is calling it a seismic event, a catastrophic reactor failure. But my sources say the last transmission wasn't a distress call. It was a single, repeating data packet, a geological survey. The colony had found something in the deep shafts, something crystalline." This was it. The pattern was the same as the Stardust Drifter. The geodes weren't just attacking, they were being drawn to something. Or they were harvesting. The Charon Nebula is a stellar nursery. The Nomad's thought resonated in my mind, cold and clear, rich in heavy elements and complex molecular structures, a prime environment for geode expansion. They are not just destroying, they are seeding. The thought was horrifying. The geodes weren't just a roving band of purifiers, they were a plague, a cosmic infection that was spreading from system to system. We had to move. Leaving the vein was even trickier than arriving. Silas wiped our docking records, creating a ghost file of the orbiter being sold for scrap. Wrench sealed the docking bay doors from the inside, her final act of assistance before we melted back into the shadows. We slid out of the sump without a sound, a phantom leaving its lair, our disguise dissolving back into the void as we engaged the FTL drive. The Nomad, now fully armed and armored, felt like a coiled spring, a predator eager to be unleashed. Ava was at the helm, not in the simulator, but in the physical cockpit Wrench had built for her. I could feel her excitement, her nervous energy, a sharp, bright spark in our shared consciousness. The Charon Nebula was a swirling maelstrom of iridescent gas and newborn stars, a place of stunning, chaotic beauty. It was also a perfect place to hide a fleet. As we approached the Crimson Deep colony, we dropped out of FTL and engaged the cloak. The colony was on a large, volatile moon orbiting a gas giant. From a distance, everything looked normal. The lights of the settlement glowed in the perpetual twilight of the nebula, but the Nomad sensors told a different story. There was no communication traffic, no ship movements, no heat signatures from the landing pads, just a profound, unnatural silence, and something else, a faint, rhythmic energy pulse emanating from the main mining shaft, the same frequency as the crystal ship. It was the sound of silence. "They are still here," the Nomad stated. The thought, a blade of ice in my mind. They are gestating. We descended into the moon's atmosphere, a silent, invisible teardrop in the swirling clouds. Eva piloted us with a surgeon's precision, navigating the turbulent atmospheric currents with an ease that was almost preternatural. We landed the Nomad in a deep, radiation-scarred canyon a few kilometers from the colony, the ship's hull automatically mimicking the texture and heat signature of the surrounding rock. It was a perfect camouflage. We needed to know what was happening inside that mine. The Nomad could have sent in nanoprobes, but the energy field from the mine shaft was interfering with its delicate systems. We needed eyes on the ground. Human eyes. It was a 2-person job. I would go, and to my surprise, Eva insisted on coming with me. "You're the brains," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument as she checked the charge on a hegemony-issue pulse rifle. "I'm the trigger finger, and I'm not sitting this one out." I didn't argue. I had a feeling we would need her skills. We donned environmental suits and set out across the desolate, rocky landscape. The air was thin and tasted of sulfur. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of our boots on the volcanic rock. As we neared the colony, we began to see them, the colonists. They were frozen everywhere, caught in the middle of their daily lives, just like the crew of the Stardust Drifter. A group of engineers stood around a broken-down ground transport, their tools still in their hands, their bodies transformed into statues of dull, gray quartz. Children were frozen on a playground, their laughter forever silenced. Their game of tag turned into a permanent, crystalline sculpture garden. The horror of it was profound, a silent scream that echoed in the empty streets. Ava, the tough-as-nails ex-soldier, stopped and stared, her breath catching in her throat. I saw a flicker of her past in her eyes, a memory of some other battlefield, some other loss. This was what we were fighting, this cold, silent, absolute finality. We reached the entrance to the main mine shaft. The massive blast doors were slightly ajar, and a faint, blue light pulsed from within. The rhythmic energy was stronger here, a low hum that vibrated through the soles of our boots. We slipped inside. The mine was a vast, cathedral-like space, a testament to the colonists' engineering prowess. But it had been transformed. The rock walls were covered in a lattice of glowing, blue crystal, and the air was thick with a strange, sweet-smelling dust that glittered in the beams of our helmet lights. At the center of the main cavern, where the primary drill had once stood, was the source of the energy. It was a crystal, a single, impossibly large shard the size of a starship, its facets glowing and pulsing in time with the hum. It was growing, fed by a network of crystalline veins that snaked their way through the mine, drawing energy and minerals directly from the moon's core. And at the base of the massive crystal, embedded within its translucent surface, were hundreds of bodies. The colonists. They were not just frozen. They were being absorbed, their biological matter being broken down and used as fuel for the crystal's growth. This wasn't just a massacre. It was a harvest. This crystal was a seed, a terraforming engine that was slowly converting the entire moon into a new geode world. "By the stars," Ava whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and revulsion. "What is it?" "It is a world forge," the nomad's voice answered in my mind, a cold knot of fury and ancient memory tightening in my gut. "A genesis point. If it reaches maturity, it will shatter the moon and seed the entire nebula with its fragments. Each fragment will become a new forge. This is how they spread." Before we could react, the cavern flooded with movement. From alcoves in the crystal walls, figures emerged. They were geodes, but not like the ships. These were ground soldiers, warriors. They were vaguely humanoid in shape, but their bodies were made of the same translucent, blue crystal as the forge. They had no faces, no eyes, just a smooth, faceted surface that refracted the light. They moved with a silent, unnatural grace, armed with blades of pure, solidified energy. We were surrounded. So much for a quiet recon. Eva muttered, raising her rifle. We opened fire. The pulse rifle bolts sizzled against their crystalline bodies, chipping off fragments but not stopping them. They were relentless, silent, moving with a coordinated precision that was both beautiful and terrifying. We fell back, firing as we retreated. But there were too many of them. One of them lunged at Ava, its energy blade slicing through the air. She dodged, a blur of motion, and fired a point-blank shot that shattered its head, but another took its place instantly. I felt a searing pain in my side as a shard of flying crystal pierced my suit and the flesh beneath. The world tilted, my vision blurring. A geode warrior stood over me, its energy blade raised for the final strike. And then the cavern roof exploded inwards. A torrent of rock and metal rained down, crushing a dozen of the crystal warriors. Through the gaping hole in the ceiling, the nomad descended, its sleek, black form a stark contrast to the glowing blue of the mine. It had shed its camouflage, its weapon ports glowing with barely contained power. Wrench's armor plating held strong against the falling debris, and the ship's anti-gravity field kept it stable in the confined space. A panel on its underside opened, and a barrage of micromissiles, a gift from the Vigilance's armory, streaked into the cavern, turning the geode warriors into showers of glittering dust. It was a rescue, but it was also a declaration. The time for stealth was over. The nomad hovered over the World Forge, its presence a challenge to the silent, growing god in the heart of the mine. Ava and I were tractor-beamed back into the ship, my wound already being sealed by the ship's medical nanites. I looked at the main view screen. The World Forge was reacting to our presence. The pulsing light intensified, and the hum rose to a deafening roar. Tendrils of crystal erupted from its surface, lashing out at the nomad like angry serpents. It is accelerating its growth cycle, the nomad communicated, its consciousness a storm of tactical analysis and cold fury. It intends to self-destruct, to release its spores ahead of schedule. Xylo. I sub-vocalized, my mind racing. Are you ready? The song is composed. The Cathar's thoughts, translated through the nomad, were calm and focused. But the instrument has not been tested. The resonant frequencies of the forge are immense. Firing the cannon could overload our core. Eva, I said, turning to the cockpit, get us out of this mine. And get ready to fly like you're trying to outrun the end of the world. Ava just grinned, her hands gripping the controls. The wild, untamed light was back in her eyes, brighter than ever. Junker, she said, the end of the world is what I do for a living. The Nomad's resonance cannon, Xylo's masterpiece, began to glow, a symphony of destructive energy building in its core. We were about to strike our first real blow against the Silent Empire. It was a desperate gamble, an untested weapon against an incomprehensible foe. But as I looked at my crew of broken, discarded parts, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't just the will to survive. It was the will to win. The Nomad's escape from the mine was a brutal, chaotic symphony of violence and grace. Ava was a demon at the controls, weaving the ship through the collapsing tunnels with an intuitive ferocity that defied physics. Chunks of rock the size of ground transports rained down around us, and crystalline tendrils lashed out from the walls, scoring deep grooves in our new armor. The World Forge was fighting back, trying to bury us, to crush us before we could unleash our weapon. Inside the ship, Xylo was the calm at the center of the storm. He stood before his weapons console, a shimmering, holographic interface that responded to the slightest twitch of his antennae. He was not just aiming a cannon, he was tuning an orchestra of cosmic destruction. He filtered the chaotic energy feedback from the forge, isolating its core resonant frequency, the single, pure note that held its impossible structure together. The core frequency is unstable. His thoughts, precise and melodic, echoed in our shared consciousness. It is modulating, attempting to shield itself, but it has a rhythm, a heartbeat. I can hear it. The resonance cannon was at full charge, its energy core glowing a blinding white that flooded the bridge. The entire ship vibrated with contained power, a low, guttural hum that resonated in my bones. It was a terrifying, exhilarating sound, the sound of a god-killer clearing its throat. "We're clear of the mine," Eva shouted, her voice tight with adrenaline as we burst from the ground and ascended into the nebulous swirling clouds. "But that thing is going nuclear." On the view screen, the entire moon of Crimson Deep was convulsing. Cracks of blue energy spiderwebbed across its surface, and the ground around the mine shaft was beginning to bulge, to break apart. The World Forge was shedding its shell, preparing to cast its seeds into the void. We had seconds, not minutes. "Fire!" I commanded, the word a fusion of my own desperate hope and the Nomad's cold, calculated will. Xylo's antennae twitched, and the universe held its breath. A beam of pure, coherent sound, a weaponized vibration erupted from the Nomad's cannon. It was invisible, silent, a ghost of a weapon that carried no light and no heat. But its effect was instantaneous and absolute. The World Forge screamed. It was not a sound that could be heard with ears, but a psychic shriek of agony that tore through our consciousness, a wave of pure, existential pain. The massive crystal, the god in the heart of the moon, began to vibrate, its perfect facets blurring. A single, hairline fracture appeared on its surface, then another, and another. The sound of silence had been answered with a chorus of chaos. A chain reaction of catastrophic resonance failure tore through the World Forge. It shattered, not into pieces, but into an infinite cloud of glittering dust, its structure unmade at a molecular level. The blue light that had filled the mine winked out, and the psychic scream died with it, leaving a profound and ringing silence in its wake. The chain reaction didn't stop with the forge. The crystalline lattice that had infected the entire moon, deprived of its heart, began to decay. The crystal veins crumbled to powder, and the beautiful, terrifying statues of the colonists dissolved, leaving behind only the gray, volcanic dust of the moon. We had not just destroyed the geode seed, we had sterilized the infection. But the victory was short-lived. The destruction of the World Forge had triggered a response. From the swirling depths of the Charon Nebula, they came, not scouts, not terraformers, warships, dozens of them, all shaped from the same cold, perfect, crystalline material. They were silent, majestic, and utterly terrifying. They arranged themselves in a flawless geometric formation, a wall of silent judgment between us and escape. And at their center was a vessel that dwarfed the others, a command ship that pulsed with a cold, malevolent intelligence. They were waiting. The Nomad's thought was grim. The forge was bait. They knew we would come. They have studied us. A communication signal, not of sound or radio, but of pure mathematical logic, was directed at us. It was not a hail or a threat. It was a statement of fact. Entity hybrid abomination. Status flaw detected. Directive sterilize. Well, Ava breathed, her knuckles white on the controls. So much for a quiet exit. Xylo, what's the status of the cannon? I asked, my mind racing through tactical options. The weapon is depleted, the Cathar replied, his tone heavy with regret. The shot required a full discharge of the primary capacitors. It will take time to recharge time we do not have. We were outgunned, outnumbered, and our only real weapon was offline. The Geode fleet began to advance, their movements perfectly synchronized, their intent absolute. This was it. This was the impossible fight we had been preparing for, and we were going to lose. But as I looked at the faces of my crew, at Eva's defiant glare, at Xylo's focused calm, at Wrench, who I could feel moving in the engineering bay, reinforcing a damaged power conduit with silent efficiency, I knew we wouldn't make it easy for them. Ava, I said, my voice steady. You wanted to outrun the end of the world. How about we dance with it instead? A slow, dangerous grin spread across her face. It's my favorite song. What followed was a battle that would be forever absent from any official history. It was the Song of the Junker, the Ghost, and the Broken Soldier. Ava flew the Nomad, not like a ship, but like an extension of her own will. We dove. We weaved. We used the nebula's volatile gas clouds and asteroid fields as our shield and our camouflage. We couldn't fight them head-on, so we bled them. We made lightning-fast strikes on their weaker, outlying ships, using our last few missiles and our conventional plasma cannons to punch holes in their crystalline hulls. We were a mosquito, a persistent, infuriating gnat that they couldn't swat. The Nomad's hybrid nature was our greatest asset. Its alien systems allowed us to anticipate their movements, to predict their perfectly logical but inflexible tactics. My human unpredictability, filtered through Eva's reckless piloting, allowed us to do the one thing they couldn't comprehend, be irrational. We faked a reactor breach, venting glowing plasma that forced a section of their fleet to break formation. We used a targeted tractor beam to hurl an asteroid at one of their cruisers, a crude, brutish tactic that they never saw coming. We were chaos, a messy, imperfect variable in their perfect, sterile equation, and it was infuriating them. We were taking damage. Their energy weapons, beams of pure, focused order, were slicing through our armor. The ship was screaming, systems failing, alarms blaring. I could feel the Nomad's pain, its struggle to hold itself together, and I pushed my own will into its systems, reinforcing them, holding the line. We were bleeding, but we were still fighting. It was during a particularly desperate maneuver, while dodging a volley of energy lances, that I saw it. The Geode command ship, the source of their coordinated attack, had a flaw. A flicker. The Nomad's deep-range sensors, boosted by the tech we'd stolen from the Vigilance, detected a momentary dip in its energy signature, a rhythmic pulse that was almost identical to the World Forge's heartbeat. It was a long shot, a desperate, insane gamble. Xylo, I yelled. I need one more shot, not a full charge. Just a single, focused note. Can you do it? I felt the Cathar's concentration, a laser-like focus in our shared mind. The core is unstable. A partial charge could trigger a cascade failure. It could destroy us. I know, I said. Do it. While Eva drew the fleet's fire, pulling them into a suicidal chase through a dense asteroid field. Xylo and I worked on the final, desperate note of our song. We rerouted all remaining power, even life support, to the resonance cannon. The lights on the bridge flickered and died, plunging us into emergency lighting. The ship groaned in protest, its systems on the verge of collapse. But the cannon began to glow, a faint, sickly green light. It wasn't the powerful, pure white of before, but it was something. "I've got the frequency." Xylo's thought was a triumphant whisper. "It is not a flaw. It is a control signal. The command ship is a hive mind. It is singing to its fleet. If we can disrupt the song..." The choir falls apart. I finished. "Ava, I need a clear shot. Just 1 second. You're going to owe me a drink for this junker," she grunted, pulling the Nomad into a tight, impossible turn that slammed me against the console. For one perfect, heart-stopping moment, we were facing the Geode command ship, a clear line of sight through the chaos. Now I screamed. The green beam lashed out, weak and thin, a pathetic imitation of the blast that had destroyed the World Forge. But it was perfectly tuned. It struck the command ship, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Geode vessel shuddered. Its internal light flickered, and the perfectly synchronized movements of its fleet faltered. The hive mind had been deafened. The perfect geometric formation dissolved into chaos as dozens of ships, suddenly deprived of their guiding intelligence, began to drift aimlessly. Some even fired on each other in their confusion. We didn't wait to see the outcome. Eva slammed the FTL drive, and with a final shuddering groan, the Nomad tore a hole in reality and vanished, leaving the broken or silent choir of the Geode fleet to their fate. We drifted for what felt like an eternity, a broken, bleeding ship in the silent void between the stars. The battle had cost us dearly. The Nomad was crippled, its power core fluctuating dangerously, its hull a patchwork of sealed breaches and fused armor. But we were alive, and we were free. As the ship's automated repair systems slowly, painstakingly began their work, the four of us gathered on the bridge. We were a strange, unlikely crew, a disgraced pilot, a pacifist artist of destruction, a silent, cybernetic giantess, and a half-human, half-alien scavenger. We were the junka the universe had thrown away, and we had just killed a god and scattered an immortal fleet. We had won a battle, but we all knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the void outside, that we had just started the war. The Geodes were not gone. We had hurt them, confused them, but they would adapt. They would learn from our chaos, and they would come back, not with a fleet, but with an armada. They would come back for the messy, imperfect, chaotic little species that had dared to sing a different song. I looked out at the star-dusted tapestry of the galaxy, at the infinite, beautiful, terrifying expanse of it all. I had started this journey looking for a score, a way to escape a life of rust and dust. But I had found something else. I had found a purpose. We were not just scavengers anymore. We were not just survivors. We were the antibodies in the bloodstream of the universe, the chaotic variable in the equation of existence. We were the ghost of Tartarus, and our hunt had just begun. The silence was coming for us all, but we were going to scream until the very end.